Good afternoon, everyone. It is Fed Day. My name is Jonathan Levin. I'm a columnist with Bloomberg Opinion. I'm here with two colleagues. Allison Schrager, she's the author of An Economist Walks into a Brothel and Other Unexpected Places to Understand Risk. Also here with us today, my colleague, Catherine Ann Edwards. She's a labor economist, independent policy consultant, and co-host of the Optimist Economy podcast. So in just about 5 minutes time, we're going to get the Fed decision. I will say there is an almost overwhelming consensus that we're going to get a 25 basis point cut. Would be the first cut of the year, the first cut of Donald Trump's new government, and for, I guess, strictly symbolic reasons, it's going to feel like something, but it's widely expected by the market at this point. And so the vibe is that what we're really going to be focusing on here is the sort of language that is used, the language that's used in the statement, the language that is used by Chair Powell at his 2:30 press conference, and any tea leaves that we can sort of get in the statement itself. Does anybody dissent? And lastly, what are policymakers projecting in their quarterly summary of economic projections? How are they reading the labor market, which has been pretty confusing recently? How are they reading inflation? And what do they think it all adds up to for policy? So, Allison, let me go to you first. That was a mouthful right there. Like, where is the signal in the noise?
Well, I mean, I think this is a big meeting, not just because it could be the first cut. It's not because of the political pressure, not because the shakeup of who's on the board or who stayed on the board, but this is also like a big meeting before they undertake their framework review. And in the last framework review, they made an explicit decision to focus more on unemployment over inflation. And then inflation broke out, not because they made that decision, but it just happened to be a poorly timed decision. And so now with this new framework review, they're going to have to decide whether or not they're going to, walk that back or continue with that. And we're at an interesting point with the economy right now in that we do have still kind of a hot inflation number, very hot stock market, a weakening labor market. So to me, where they go, not only today, but where they signal they're going forward is, are they going to sort of recalibrate that weight in the framework review and going forward? Or are they just going to hedge that bet? Or are they sort of still going with, we care about the labor market more than inflation?
Okay, Catherine Ann, over to you for your sort of preview of what to expect here. Put this all in context for us, and if you could help us understand how to think about the politics of all this, because people who aren't day-to-day Fed watchers, they're just seeing President Trump out there week after week, sort of badgering Chair Jerome Powell, making a lot of noise in the court system about trying to push out a standing governor and member of the Federal Open Market Committee. How should people be thinking about the direction of policy and all of that vis-a-vis what they're hearing in the political sphere?
The Fed is in an incredibly tough position 2 times over. They're an economic institution meant to both stabilize prices and maximize employment in our economy. And at the moment, we are taking a direction towards stagflation, where prices are rising, but the labor market is deteriorating, which would ask for 2 opposite actions from the Fed: one to raise interest rates to curb price growth, and one to lower interest rates to boost the economy. At the moment, the consensus is that they're gonna err on the side of helping the labor market, but it's not clear that that's a one and done decision, that policy will be effective given where the labor market difficulties are coming from, the overarching specter of tariffs both taking effect and getting worse in terms of their economic impact. And that makes that decision incredibly difficult of what are you willing to risk, what you think versus what you think an interest rate increase or decrease could potentially solve. But the parallel kind of impossibility that the Fed is in is that this is the most politicized the Federal Reserve decision making has been probably in 50 years. And that you have a president that is not only actively campaigning for a specific decision, but actively undermining independence of
And
the
let me
reserve.
let, let me just
There
cut
we
you
go.
off there, because here comes the numbers. So we do get that quarter point cut, conforming with what the market and the consensus of professional economists was expecting. In terms of any potential surprises, the committee, the median member of the Federal Open Market Committee, is now expecting a little bit more easing during the current year than had previously been priced in. And I would point out, however, that the committee's forecasts are not changing the long run expectation of where rates may land, right? There's still this expectation that over sort of the medium-ish term, we're going to land around 3% rates. This is not a wholesale rethink of where we're going to end up, but there is an expectation baked into these numbers that we're getting here today that perhaps because of what we're seeing in the labor market, they're going to potentially speed things up. So let me bring you some details here. We get one dissent. I should say just one dissent, because it felt going into this that we could really start to see unity break down on this committee. But we end up getting one dissent in favor of a 50 basis point cut. Let me bring you some more headlines from the Bloomberg terminal. So the median projection now shows 50 basis points of more cuts in 2025. So that would mean one cut in each of the last two meetings of the year. Fed Governor Stephen Miron is the dissenter in favor of that half-point cut. I should point out, there was some speculation. I included some of this speculation in my last column that Governors Waller and Bowman could potentially join him because they dissented last time around. So if you just added up last meeting with this meeting, you might have thought maybe they would dissent too. But it is interesting that embattled Fed Chair Jerome Powell is able to build consensus here, even with some of the people that ostensibly disagreed with him last time around. So all in all, this is sort of an as expected decision, and it's an as expected decision with a little less of a splintering of that Fed unanimity that you would have thought. Catherine and Edwards, what do you take away from those high level headlines that I'm reading off the terminal here?
On some level, I'm just impressed by how Powell was able to keep his committee together. I suppose, I'm getting far afield from the labor economist that I am, but part of me wonders if, everyone being in concert with the new appointee on the outskirts is a way to signal that the Fed values kind of their own decision-making over the influence of the president, and making it clear that he, maybe signaling in some way that he appointed an outlier to the board as someone who moves in step with economic independence. It's an interesting, speculation that, of course, I have no basis in fact of whether or not that's what occurred, but you could definitely read it that way. I mean, going back to what I do understand and know, the labor market has been showing signs of, solid but cooling, a slow deterioration, for over a year, and giving it the attention that it deserves in the rate committee, I think, is in some sense welcome. And just that we would like workers to have relief, and we would like businesses to have relief to know that we're not going to just march headlong into a recessionary cycle. But I think there is concern that, will this be enough, and will it be helpful, given that the pressure here is coming from mainly tariffs as opposed to a natural slowdown in an economic cycle?
Yeah. Well, I mean, unpack this a little bit for us. Like, I want to sort of back up for people who are coming at the labor market debate sort of for the first time. My understanding, Catherine Ann, is that there are some legitimate signs of concern out there. Payrolls growth has been very weak. But there are also people who are very cautious about that interpretation. They'll say, well, wait a minute, it's a complicated moment because labor supply is also dropping due to some very explicit immigration policies, changes in immigration policies. And at the same time, a different signal that we could take from the ratios, the unemployment rate, the layoffs rate, is saying that things actually aren't changing as fast as we might think. Fundamental demand in the labor market may not be changing as fast as we might think. How do you tell that story, Catherine Ann?
Oh, I mean, the ground is shifting underneath our feet.
Okay.
How many jobs is a good number of jobs to add in a month from payroll employers? 12 months ago, I think people would have lined up around a consensus of it should be around, 125 to 175, somewhere in this range. We're in the six figures, but it's not necessarily gangbusters into the 200s. Now you're having people report that, given the extent of deportation policy and its broader effects on immigration in general and people showing up to work, it's affecting not just who is deported, but then who doesn't show up to work as for fear of being deported, or maybe who doesn't come to the U.S. because of, hostile immigration climate, that the population isn't expanding as much as it was 2 years ago or 1 year ago. And now the target number is as low as 50,000. So the ability, our ability to interpret a signal as being weak or strong, requires context, and that context is changing. The target number of jobs per month is just one example. It's funny, like, what is fast and slow when the unemployment rate for your group is above 10%, as it is for young workers right now? Like, what is fast and slow if the hiring rate has been falling for, over a year? It's hard to paint the overall portrait of labor market strength for those groups that are seeing severe difficulty, a new notch in long-term unemployment, the share of workers that have been looking for a job for at least 6 months. These are terrible benchmarks to hit, even within a recession, as opposed to outside of one.
Yeah. Well, so let's let me try and get this. Give me 1 second. I want to try and get a new screen up here. I want to see and talk about how the Federal Open Market Committee is thinking about these very issues. And so, actually, give me 1 more second there. Where are we? Okay. Let's see if this works here, folks. Okay. So here we have, let me try and blow this up for my esteemed colleagues and also for readers out there who are squinting very, very hard. Okay. That might not help you that much, but I'm going to try. Okay. So this is your strike-through comparison of the current statement from the FOMC as compared to the previous statement. They, typically roll over a lot of the language from a meeting to meeting. And when they do make changes, it is because they want you to know that there have been significant changes in the outlook in some ways. So from the get-go, there is a slight change to the opening language. They eliminate one clause, and it now starts with recent indicators suggest that growth of economic activity moderated in the first half of the year. Job gains have slowed. This is new language. Job gains have slowed, and the unemployment rate has edged up. Note that verb choice, edged up. That's very carefully chosen. They don't do these things casually. And indeed, it has edged up, right? But as those of us know who follow this on a month-to-month basis, it's edged up very, very slowly. It's edged up, but remains low. And another important point. At any other time in history, at most other times in history, you would have looked at a 4.3% unemployment rate and said, potentially, this might be as good as it gets. Inflation has moved up and remains somewhat elevated. This is also a tweak to the language. Inflation is not just remaining somewhat elevated, but it has actually moved up a little bit. And just as a reminder, one of the things that this reflects is tariff policy, right? You have seen essentially core goods prices move from a slightly deflationary stance in 2024 to adding some subtle heat to the overall number. I want to just scan down now to the second sentence of the second paragraph. The committee is attentive to the risks to both sides of its dual mandate and judges that downside risks to employment have risen. Okay, there are still two-sided risks, but they're saying that the momentum is moving against us potentially on the employment side of the mandate, and so they then go on to tell us what they did, and then of course at the bottom you see the fact that Stephen Myron was the lone dissenter here, as we pointed out earlier. So let's go back to the economic outlook. Catherine Ann eloquently laid out her case. Allison, tell us about your case and tell us your analysis of the consensus case on the committee. Does this resonate with you?
No, not really. I'm actually disappointed of the uniformity.
We count on you for your bluntness. Thank you.
Because honestly, I think it would in some ways be healthier if we did see more dissent in both directions. Okay. Of staying the same. I mean, because there's hardly, I understand markets were counting on a cut and the Fed hates to disappoint markets. And, they have a lot of political pressure, but the case for a cut was not like a slam dunk. I could see why they would make that decision. But I think when you have the whole committee in lockstep, this is the right thing to do. That to me suggests some serious groupthink and overconfidence, particularly with, the labor market is weakening largely for, as Catherine Ann pointed out, tariff issues, maybe other supply side issues, all of which the monetary policy has very little impact on. And I think this was a mistake we saw pre-pandemic. It might have contributed to being very late into dealing with inflation in the last time, is trying to think that monetary policy could be used for tools it's really just not suited for and can sort of fix problems in the labor market, to be honest, are often the fiscal policy or other government policies that we could be, doing to address these problems more aggressively. So, I think I'm just looking at the cohesiveness and just sort of saying, maybe this isn't healthy. I mean, as you know, I'm friendly with Stephen and, 50 basis points isn't what I would have voted for. But, at least there is a little bit of a healthy discussion now. Anyway, it's not the direction I would go in.
Yeah. Okay. All right, fair enough. Let me dig into this question of sort of consensus building at the FOMC, because I think it's a curious one, and I will admit I am confused about this question. On the one hand, I see opponents of the Fed, critics of the Fed, saying, look, the Fed is an institution where you see a lot of groupthink. It doesn't feel democratic. They always vote the way the chair wants to go. I actually disagree with that criticism, because it's my job in part to watch all of these Fed speeches throughout the intermeeting period. And I see these people making differing arguments throughout the intermeeting period. They are constantly disagreeing with one another. It's just that disagreement tends to play out, I think, before they actually gather for the meeting. And then these meetings tend to be a moment of sort of coming together, ironing out the odds and ends, thinking about how they want to communicate with the public, and so forth. But I will admit also that it kind of looks bad when everybody is voting the same way pretty consistently, by the way, over like the past 20 to 30 years, it kind of looks bad. And it doesn't do a great job of convincing the public that the Fed isn't an institution that favors like this groupthink. What do you make of that, Catherine Ann? And along those lines, how do you think policymakers are thinking about that question now when Donald Trump is brought into the fold and he's sort of attacking the institution, right? So there's this, I feel like there's this inherent desire to show the world, no, like we're still unified around this institutional culture and these institutional values, and not show cracks in the face of this outward attack. How do you think they're thinking about it? How do you think they should think about it there on the committee, Catherine Ann?
You know, I think the breadth of our discussion kind of indicates to me that it's a symbolic gesture more than anything else, allowing for interpretation, whichever way that it goes. I mean, it could be that they're, hold on to your hats. Maybe they're scared that if someone dissents in the wrong direction, they'll become the intense target of a political attack that has no base in reality, is in fact levied against someone for whom it's not true. Whereas the people levying the attack actually have made that mistake. As we enter the club of who has applied for a primary mortgage on a vacation home, it turns out very thinning evidence that was in fact Lisa Cook. So maybe they're acting as a block because they're trying to protect themselves from the political attacks that they know are coming. Maybe they just
let me just say this scenario you're describing would never happen in the United States of America. Never.
So I mean, I think that it is symbolic, and the question is less. Is it, I mean, on one level, we're talking about, is it symbolic of a lack of intellectual flourishing and debate and disagreement within the policymaking committee and within the Federal Reserve massive research department that it has? Or is it symbolic of trying to convey leadership to the American people that whatever the disagreement we have, we are behind this decision in order to telegraph stability and decision making? Or is it simply just, listen, it's not the world that it was 1 year ago, and we have to kind of be in a closed rank in order to protect ourselves from further political attack? I think all of these are possible. We'll never know which one. And that's how a symbol like unity and decision making works.
So I just, like, that's kind of weak sauce. I mean, I was talking to a woman who was on the board with Paul Volcker, and she was telling me how when he interviewed her, he was telling her, you know what, this is not a job for the faint of heart. It's not a job to be popular. You've got to steel yourself for all sorts of criticism from politics, from the public. And, the idea that now the Fed has to be in lockstep to, protect themselves from political attacks. I mean, it's not in the best interest of monetary policy. Like, I understand that now the Fed has just become a job that seems to just sort of, be all like sort of more upside and not be the hard things. But like, that's what we kind of need from our board, is they need to sort of say unpopular things like, and I said, I think this is a defendable position. I'm not saying it's necessarily right or wrong, but certainly defendable to say, hey, inflation is 100 basis points above target. We have a stock market that is at record highs. Maybe a rate cut is not the right thing right now, especially because it's dubious that a rate cut can even do anything for unemployment.
Yeah.
But do you think the attack on Lisa Cook is business as usual, that's the type of scrutiny that they should be subject to? That it's okay to pick the first Black woman on the board and say she's a liar?
No, I'm not defending the attacks on her, but I don't think that's an excuse to say, all right, well, I'm not going to dissent anyway. I don't think it's the right rate decision. I mean, like, this is the environment they're in. And I think Fed board members need to sort of do the right thing, not say, oh, we're all going to vote together to show unity.
I should caveat my opinion saying I've never met anyone who served on the board, and I'm not friends with any of them. So mine's an outside speculation. Yeah,
and actually I have heard, I mean, maybe now morale is higher, but I have a friend who left the board recently. They said going in, morale was actually very low, and that he was on, it was much better. So, I mean, maybe they all galvanized, and this is what we're seeing.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with the sentiment that, like, if you're going on the FMC, you better put on your big boy and big girl pants and know that, you better be ready for anything that comes at you. This is a big job. It is fundamentally one of the most important jobs in global financial markets. So like the idea that anybody there should be treated with kid gloves, I don't know. But I would just say I am totally all for intellectual debate, open disagreement when it comes to policy. But the problem is that this sort of rhetoric out of the White House puts these people in an impossible situation. Like, the public doesn't know. Honestly, the public has no way of judging if people are dissenting for the right reasons or the wrong reasons, or maybe they think they're dissenting for the right reasons, but they're just human and they're reacting to the fact that the president of the United States is like threatening them with real crimes. That's the fundamental problem, and that's, I think, why we have lived in at least a culture, like an unspoken rule, where the president didn't talk about these things, at least publicly, for years, at least since the 90s. And I think that arrangement, like, as imperfect as it might have seemed to some people, maybe it seemed like kind of phony on the surface or whatever, but it served a purpose. It helped the people on the committee focus on the data, and it helped the public have more faith in the fact that the people on the committee were focusing on the data. And now I want to change topics before you guys can criticize my point.
Fair enough.
Okay, so we've got about 10 minutes left, and I want to actually go ahead and focus on the data. I just wanted to go through these numbers. I think it's always interesting to talk about why the committee is doing what it's doing and predicting that it will do what it's going to do in a little while. And I'm always keen to hear if you guys think that this internally makes sense. So this is the Federal Open Market Committee's summary of economic projections. It is famously not a consensus opinion of where they think policy is going or what they think is going to happen in the economy, but a simple survey of Federal Reserve Bank presidents and Federal Reserve Board members. And we tend to focus, for better or worse, on the median. And what that median is telling us is that the median member of the committee still thinks that we're in like a so-so growth world. 1.6% change in real GDP projected for 2025, 1.8% for 2026. That's not gangbusters, but it's also not terrible. They are projecting that the unemployment rate, we were talking about how it's at 4.3%, they're predicting that it's going to keep ticking up, and so that's noteworthy. You wonder if the two rate cuts that are projected through the end of the year are implicitly conditioned on this unemployment rate continuing to move up to 4.5%, and what might happen if the labor market finds its footing. They are projecting that PCE inflation, both core and headline, is going to end up hovering around 3% through the end of the year, before ultimately cooling in 2026 and basically converging on or near target by 2027, and then going back there and kind of staying there. And I guess you could infer that if the scenario plays out like this, then we land back with rates around 3%, call it the low threes, 3 to 3.25%. Does this outlook comport with your sense of reality, Allison?
No, not at all.
Putting it all together? What's wrong specifically?
How are we getting to 2% inflation in a couple of years when they've already started cutting? Like, it seems like they've declared victory on inflation, and I guess they're just going to assume that, I don't know, are they saying the economy is going to weaken and inflation is going to go back to 2%? I don't see particularly the tariff environment, with all these, with this sort of just lower trade environment, why they think inflation is going to go back down to 2%. I am curious as well about their projection of the labor market weakening substantially, and that might be true. I also am just always baffled by their insistence that interest rates are going to go back to something similar to that we saw pre-pandemic. I think with a higher debt environment, that's also just pure fantasy. So like another idea that's being floated for the framework review is sort of, a wider range of dot plots and governors having their names on it. I would like to see that, because I'm starting to feel like this is just, what we would like to happen. Like this is like their vision board more than an actual projection.
Yeah, I too have been a big sort of advocate of a more detailed summary of economic projections. I feel like this anonymity doesn't really serve anyone. Some governors and presidents will come out and actually tell you where they put their dot, but others will not. So it ends up giving you an uneven sense of where people come from. And additionally, I feel like the publication of these base cases is not terribly helpful. I feel like a lot of these things are conditional on where things go, and I'm a fan of scenarios. Catherine Ann, what's your impression of this document? Does it work for you?
I have always found this table to be so inscrutable. I never know what to get from it. It's funny, you go to the median. I always go to the range just to see the high low. But even then, I don't know if it's necessarily informative. What you would really want is for every number to have like at least a paragraph behind it of like what was their thinking for each number, because you just want to get into their logic and their thought process for some of these, like not just who put the dot where, but what made them move it in any particular direction. I mean, the long run, the next year's range for the federal fund rates is between 2.4 and 3.9 on the full range. I would love to know the discussion there. I mean, this kind of goes back to, if anything, it kind of shows us that there's more discussion than uniformity with these long range or with the range of estimates rather than the median or central tendency. But I would love to know the argument on each side. I think so much of Fed speculation comes down to making the various cases for them of like, here's the case for thinking inflation will go down versus up. Here's the case for raising rates, holding rates steady and lowering them. And you'd love to hear what their case would be, as opposed to us, admittedly having a cushy job making it on their behalf.
Fair enough. All right. So listen, we've got 3 minutes to go until the Powell presser. I know everybody who stuck with us on this stream is also going to want to hear exactly what the chair has to say. So I want to go round robin for final words. Allison and Catherine Ann. Allison, we'll start with you. What is your high level takeaway, and what do you still want to hear from the chair? What can the chair clarify for you that will make this story more clear?
I think this is an incredibly risk-averse Fed that is trying to please everyone, markets and the president. And what I would like to hear is a really sort of convincing case for independence and a commitment to really sort of taking on inflation and not just on a hope and a prayer. But probably we'll just get a lot of vague Fed speak about, watching a weakening labor market.
Okay. What about you, Catherine Ann?
Oh, yeah. I mean, while we're going through dream press conferences, I would love to know how effectual they think monetary policy can be in the face of tariffs.
Okay.
Is this really is this something that monetary policy can make as much of a difference as, kind of a more like self-fulfilling slowdown than one that's, essentially caused by an economic policy out of their control. And I would love to know how effectual they think a rate cut could be and where that weighs into their risk factor relative to how effectual monetary policy can be in dampening the tariff inflation. Are they equally effective in both directions? I'd love to know that. But yeah, he'll probably talk about the labor market weakening.
All right. Well, with that, you guys are both very skeptical that Chair Powell is going to come out with answers to your concerns. But with that, thank you to everybody for tuning in. Thank you to Allison Schrager. Thank you to Catherine Ann Edwards. And go forth and listen to Chair Powell and see what he has to say. We'll be back for payrolls next month. Thank you for joining.
Bye, y'all.